This is the next chapter, a show all about writing, authors, and the world of publishing books. I'm your Amazon best-selling host, Fred Hughes, author of military science fiction and anything else I feel like writing. If Biz TV is gracious enough to let me do this, to talk about my work and other authors' works, like and subscribe to the Biz TV YouTube channel. If you like the show, give us a thumbs up. Now, on to the show. Going to do a shameless plug for a couple of books that are coming out here soon. The first book is Bureau 42. It's an anthology edited by Kevin Eikenberry and Mia Cleave, published by Chris Kennedy Publishing. If you don't know if you can see it there in the graphics, but I'm listed first as the author, one of the authors in the book. I was honored to be asked to write a short story in this. A little bit of background on this book. This is set in the Four Horsemen universe, which is an incredibly prolific and popular series of books. The original concept was created by Mark Wandry, and Chris Kennedy Publishing put the initial books out. A lot of different authors have written in this universe, and as part of the expansion of this, Kevin Eikenberry created a subgenre within the 4HU called the Peacemakers. These were basically the equivalent of the old U.S. Marshals from like the Old West. You know, you see the movies, whether, you know, some of them with John Wayne, some of them with, you know, other famous Western actors played U.S. Marshals in various movies and old television shows. And literally they policed, the U.S. Marshals policed a section of the Old West, and they were the law. You know, hundreds of thousands of, square miles of territory, and they were the only law. So oftentimes those marshals were only able to pick and choose what bad guys they were going to go after, because they didn't have time to enforce all the laws. Well, fast forward several thousand years into the future, into space, and guess what? The same thing exists out in the stellar expanse. There's an organization called the Peacemakers, who are the law enforcement arm of the Union, which is sort of the Galactic Union, the political organization that runs at least our part of the universe. And the Peacemakers enforce the laws, issue warrants, and bring criminals back for justice. But they do it selectively because there's only so many of them, and there's a lot of lawlessness. So Kevin Eikenberry created these Peacemaker universe inside the Four Horsemen universe. And the latest book he proposed is an anthology called Bureau 42, which are essentially the cold case files for the Peacemaker Guild. And Bureau 42 is a collection of stories where various peacemakers, for one reason or another, have either picked an old file that they want to go out and solve, or they've been assigned an old file that they have to go out and solve. And the stories are varied, different races, different planets, different situations. I think you'll enjoy it. It's a good primer if you've not been exposed to the Four Horsemen universe, or for that matter, the Peacemakers subsegment of that universe. So pick it up, read the stories. I think you'll find them very interesting. Next will be my shameless plug for my own book, Prince Imperador. I listened to a podcast yesterday where my publisher has a lot of problem with that name. It's Imperator, Chris, not Imperator, not some mumble. It's Prince Imperator. This is my 9th book in the Prince of Britannia series. It's the last book in the story arc. So there will not be any more Prince stories in the Britannia universe. But that's not the end. I'm currently working on the first book of the next series, which is going to be Scions of Britannia. So not to let too many cats out of the bag, but I'm going to be concentrating on the next generation of warriors and leaders in the Empire of Britannia. And you'll find out what happens on Earth. You'll find out about all the different wars and everything else that the Empire is currently fighting or may soon be fighting. So that will be out on the 19th of July. And like I said, the next book in the series is already half written and it'll be out sometime late September or early October. Last, I want to turn around and pitch the book of a friend of mine. Basically, he's been on the show. Johnny Sears, on the 5th of July, his newest book, 3-Player Game, was released. This is, I don't even know what book it is. He's got a bunch of them. It's the current book in his Lunar Free State series. And anyone who's been following this great series, I know I do, knows that since the first book, the Lunar Free State has been in conflict with various Earth governments. And over the last several books, it's been the Lunar Free State versus a coalition called the Confederation. Now there's a third group from Earth, a bunch of non-aligned nations that weren't part of the Confederation have grouped together, and now they're out in space exploring and trying to take advantage of everything. I got it today, just started it. It's just as good as the rest of John's books. So pick it up. Great series. So this week, I have a close friend, fellow author, and actually multi-talented Nicole Plume. You might have seen or read her books. She uses the pen name of Nic Plume for a variety of reasons. She's a woman who writes military science fiction, and she chose to use a nom de guerre as a pen name since, frankly, there are still a lot of men who won't read military science fiction written by a woman. Even though there are plenty of women warriors out there now, just look at the Israeli Defense Force, and even now our own army. So those days are gone, but there's still readers out there who won't read anything by a woman. But Nicole, aside from writing great military science fiction, is also an editor, has worked with several known names in the business. She's also done translations. She started off editing or proofreading translations for Chris Kennedy Publishing International, the international division. She's a native German, so German is her first language, and she started off with Chris Kennedy Publishing doing quality checks of the translations that other people did. She's also translating her own books into German, and she'll talk about that. And because I didn't know it till my own, my own books, all but my most recent book, number 8, have already been translated into German and French. But a lot of the language doesn't translate one for one. And because she speaks the language, Nicole actually rewrites sections of her book so that it makes sense in German. We'll talk to her about that, and we'll talk about what she's got going on, and we're also going to touch on the issues that a lot of new writers and old writers have when writing. So after the break, we'll be talking to her. I'm Fred Hughes. This is The Next Chapter. Welcome back to the show. As promised in the first segment, I want to welcome Nicole Plume. Sometimes, her pen name is Nic Plume. She writes military science fiction, writes great, call it orbital assault and ground pounder stories. 3 books in her series. I'll let her talk about them. She's a great author, and she's also a friend. So, and where are you at now with your husband wandering around the country?
We are right outside Davenport, Iowa right now.
So Nicole and her husband Marty decided they wanted to wander the country. So they sort of have this big circle loop that they're still in the process of completing, I think.
Yeah.
So
it's actually multiple loops, but yes, we keep going around in like making spirals around the country for the last 3 years now. It's been since we've been on the road.
So that's just all of you who say that it's too, that it's, I don't have time, it's too hard to write. Nicole is sort of like dispels, shoots holes in your excuses because she manages to do it, cruising around the country. So if she can do it, there isn't any reason why the rest of you can't do it. So anyway, so Nicole, let's talk about how you got into writing, and then then we'll follow up and get into your series. So how did Nicole Plume start writing or get into the business?
So there's actually two parts to this. The first one on getting actually into writing, trying to write my first story, which was kind of, I've always made up stories, but I never wrote them down ever since I was little. And for me, I made the story, and once it was gone, it just disappeared. And then about 14 years ago, a story came to my mind that just didn't go away. And usually I'm used to, like I said, the story's done, I fiddle around with it, it goes away. And this one did not. So I ended up trying to figure out what to do with it and decided that, okay, fine, let me write it down. And then I went on the extended journey trying to figure out how to do that. And that's where the second part started. As I was trying to figure out how to write stories, I was reading more, of course, it goes hand in hand. And I started with becoming a beta reader on another science fiction author's team. And then I kept giving him feedback on his story that he actually asked me to become his proofreader. And then a few months later, he asked me to become his editor. And then I ended up editing 40-something books for him, and over like three and a half years. And as I went through that process, I learned about writing and how to go about building stories more. And then he encouraged me actually to that there is a possibility that I would be able to self-publish, because I was never interested in becoming traditionally published, and that my story was worth telling and giving or making it available to others. And that then turned me onto the journey of self-publishing, if that makes sense. So, and then I went and learned about self-publishing. And then in 2020 is when I published my first book on my own. In 21, the second book came out. And then that was also the year when we went on the road, which means we sold our house and got rid of 80% of our property, and then moved into the RV and went on the road. And that was also the year when I met Chris Kennedy. And he read my first book and offered me a contract to republish my whole series. So that's pretty much my beginning story of how I got into this.
So so Chris basically republished what you already had 2 books that you had self-published, correct? So Chris took those in, spiffed them up. Did you get new covers for them?
Yes, he did. I did when I first considered actually self-publishing. That was in 2018. And I went to Las Vegas to the 20 books for 50K Vegas conference the first time. And I heard about it from this other author that I was editing for, and he encouraged me to go. And through that, I met and I realized that I needed editing and I needed a professional cover. So I learned there how to find an editor, and I found an editor and hired her to edit. And then I hired a cover artist, went through to get my own 2 covers for the first 2 books. And then when I met Chris and he looked at it, he re-edited and he recovered and got new covers made, which I think the new covers are absolutely much better than really what I had done beforehand. And then I got the 3rd book done in 23. And that's when Chris Kennedy actually republished all 3 books, one after the other.
Now, did you do the 3rd book as an indie, or did Chris just put it out as part of, the contract?
Yes, the latter. So yes, the first 2 were out as indie, and then I signed the contract with Chris, and I pulled the first 2 off the market again. And then once the 3rd one was done, he put them on his publishing schedule. And they came out one after the other within a month, or 5 weeks, I think it was. Last June, then July, and then beginning September is when they were published.
Okay. So, I mean, I've read your 3 books. I love them. I think
Thank you.
It's one of those things that I think they should sell better, but sometimes it's all about branding and people seeing your stuff. And but it seems to me, book 3 left a little wiggle room. There's room for more books in this. Any plan for that?
Yes, there is actually the whole arc. The story that came to me first is much longer than this. This is just the opening bang on getting the characters together and getting them on their path to the rest of the story. And I figured probably the whole series will be 8 to 9 books long total. But right now, I also have some other things that I've committed to that I am trying to get done and out of the way before I dive back into this series. But yes, the series overall will continue for multiple more books.
Well, that's outstanding, because a lot of authors have trouble coming up with ideas, and to know what you want to do, then it's just a function of getting it done. We're talking with Nic Plume, a.k.a. Nic Plume. When we come back from the break, we'll talk more to her about how she got into the business. I'm Fred Hughes, and this is The Next Chapter. Thanks for rejoining us. I'm Fred Hughes. This is the next chapter, and we're talking with Nicole Plumer, aka Nic Plume. And there she is. So we were talking about your initial 3 books that you wrote. Tell us about your first trilogy. Tell us about the books and what your inspiration was.
Right. So the inspiration originally is not covered in the books. It is about the original story that came to my mind was something that happened to the main character of the series, mom. So as a young woman, what happened to her, and then from there, I actually expanded it to her son, how her son would deal with it and find out about it. And the story kicks off with the main character and his 3 teammates going on their first mission. They are special forces coming straight off their training. They're very good in training. They were the top of the academy, top graduates. So they're kind of a little bit full of themselves and are pretty sure they know what they're doing. And then everything goes wrong to the point where the original mission is ambushed and betrayed, and they are captured. And that's what the first book is about, their struggles of surviving captivity, surviving the war, that part of the war that they're in, and further developing as a team. And in my books, a theme, I guess you want to call it, of all of my books is the characters, their companionship with their friends, their brothers on the line and sisters, and their internal and external struggles with dealing with the war and what war is and what it does to a person, and of course all the things that happen to them and their emotional and physical journey on how to deal with that and how to support each other. And then as the series continues, and first trilogy especially, things come out that there is something about the main character that is not like others. So he finds things that he can do or come easier to him that he always thought is normal, and he's finding out that those are not typical for people. And then he slowly figures out that there is more about his past that he did not realize. And and it gets slowly revealed what is going on with him over the series, so he can find out. And like I said, the first trilogy takes place on that one planet where they were captured, then them escaping and returning to their unit, and struggling with the aftermath of their captivity themselves, and then the greater picture of them having been the only survivors of the ambush and the only ones who were taken alive. And of course, the questions that brings up for the rest of the fleet, the rest of their military, of why they were spared and why they were kept alive. So there's a lot of intrigue going on, and then it comes down to enemies not being enemies and friendly forces not quite being as friendly as they should be, and the back and forth and natural, and of course the fog of war that comes into that you never see the whole picture and how they find their way through that.
And you do have plans for continuing the storyline, correct? Yes, because at the end of book 3, they're finally getting their feet under them and finding a way forward on leaving the planet, the captivity, and all of the mistrust that they have been facing in the first 3 books.
they're leaving that behind and they're moving forward. But there is clearly something more going on, a bigger intrigue in the whole war that they need to figure out. And then also something about the main character's background that they need to figure out that has something to do with the whole thing. So there's a whole, I keep calling it in the story, I keep calling it spider webs, interwoven spider webs, and the little spiders that are sitting in its center, and organizing everything. And they're trying to figure out who those spiders are and how many webs there actually are. So it's not just two sides in the war.
So besides writing and besides editing, you do something else that I haven't interviewed anybody else that does this. You've done some translation work.
Yes.
Obviously, if people can't figure it out, Nicole isn't from the United States.
No. Yes, English is actually my second language. So I was born and raised in Germany, and then I fell in love with an American GI and ran away across the big pond to the US. So as such, German is my native language, my first language. And though I write in English and have never actually attempted to write stories in German, I do translate my own stories. And I have proofread stories for Chris Kennedy Publishing, their translations too. However, I only did that for a little while, and then I concentrated on just my stories, translating.
So let me ask you this, because we've talked about this, you and I, because like I said before, Nicole and I are friends, and oftentimes in our Saturday evening Chris Kennedy Zoom call, where a bunch of authors get together and talk about all things writing, we talk about our books that have either been translated or are being translated. And do you find, because you basically are translating your own books, are you, as a part of that translation, are you rewriting your books into a German style, or are you just translating the books? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's kind of both. I mostly translate. That's what I start out with, getting a basic translation. However, you cannot do a straight translation, especially in fiction. It does not work because there's a lot of sayings that don't translate. There's a lot of humor that does not translate. Teasing does not translate. And then there are some subtleties, especially to German, that you can play with insults and also teasing in a way that does not exist in English. So in that way, I start out with doing a blank translation, but then I have to go in and I have to figure out the exact way to say it in German. Like I said, also same with the military concept. There are some military concepts that don't translate because they don't exist in German. And of course, I've never been around the military in Germany, so that is one of the struggles I have with translations, that sometimes I'm just missing the technical vocabulary in German. And but a lot of the other stuff is, it's in my native language, so I am able to do that. But it's, again, I have to rewrite sections of the book to make them actually work in German, if that makes sense.
It does, and that goes along with what some of the other authors have said, and even call it the hierarchy of Chris Kennedy Publishing International. Mark Stallings, Kevin Steverson, and Bill Webb are like the driving force behind all of these translations and getting the books out in foreign languages. But they all talk about how, this concept doesn't work. Talking about,
Yes.
Even to the point of that's not the way German military people issue orders. The style of the language doesn't fit that. So it can end up leading to 1-star reviews in Germany for the book because, your German translator sucks. Well, it's not that the translator sucked. It's just the book wasn't written by a German in German. So it's hard to translate. So after the break, we're going to come back and talk to Nicole about author struggles. I'm Fred Hughes, and this is the next chapter. And we're back talking to Nicole Plumer, a.k.a. Nic Plume. If you hear snoring in the background, that's Nicole's husband. He's having a hard time staying awake while his wife and I are doing this. Anyway, so we talked about it while we were getting ready for the show. Author issues, author problems that all of us face, and I'm sure even Brandon Sanderson and David Weber and the rest all suffer from various issues that keep them from getting any work done. So, let's talk about that, Nicole. What are those for you right now?
For me, it's staring at a blank page, and nothing comes to mind. And I know I've talked to a lot of authors that are going, well, just start typing. And that doesn't work for me. I cannot just sit down and start typing out words that come to mind because I literally will end up with nothing coming to mind. My mind will go blank. And I've struggled with that for quite some time. And the more I push, the harder I try, the worse it's been getting. So I've been trying to get at it in a different way to figure out my issue, because there's a lot of authors that say, well, you can't edit a blank page, which is absolutely true. And it doesn't matter what you put out as long as you fill the page. That is not true for me, because if it's unusable stuff, then
I don't think it's true for anyone.
I can't edit it.
And putting out bad stuff is only going to hurt your brand. That's my opinion.
Exactly. And I mean, there's, people, even if you just put blah, 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 after a few blahs, the words will flow. No, they don't. I have tried that and gone to the point where there's a whole page of blahs and nothing else comes to mind, because that's what my mind gets stuck on. But for me, it's a matter of figuring out how my mind works. And I have found that journaling helps, even though I've never really gotten into journaling before. And it's never really, I love the idea, but it's not something that I could keep up or do. And now I'm realizing that every morning I sit down, I do my morning pages, and I start writing about the story and writing out those thoughts that I can sink into it. Or the other way is when I have somebody to actually talk about it and talk a scene or a section out, that I'm able to write better. And now it's just a matter of putting out and finding that network of people that I can draw on, because, Marty always only wants to listen to my story so much before he says, okay, he's done listening to the same section over and over again as I'm trying to work it out. But that is, to me, I've over the years, I've talked to a lot of people, and there are people that say, well, writer's block doesn't exist. It's a figment of the mind. And others say, yeah, of course it exists, and this is what it looks like. And for every person it's different, and it comes down to how your mind works and how what gets it stuck. And for me, it's a lot of times if something is wrong with a story, I can't move on. I cannot move forward. And I've had, like, the short story I'm working on right now, I tried to sit down to write it last September, and I couldn't because something was wrong. I got 2 scenes done and I couldn't move any forward. And it took me until now to figure out what the issue was, and being able to work through that. And sometimes it takes that long. And you just gotta let off the pressure and the shouldn'ts or shoulds, as some people like to say. Stop shooting on yourself to force yourself to do it, because that can just make it worse for some people. Some people like the pressure. Some people are able to use the pressure to their advantage in that. I'm not one of those people. So I'm just gonna, have to back off. And that's what happened with my main series. Even though I know where it's going, I have not been able to sink into the moment of the beginning to figure out the finer details to get to the big moments I know are going to happen. And that's a lot of times what I struggle with is the finer details of, yes, they're walking down a hallway, but what's in the hallway? And I can't see it. I can't write it. And the more I push, the more the fog comes in and covers, and I can't even see less. And so sometimes I just have to back up and back off. And that's what I've been doing with my main series, of getting into other stories and writing other things to just let that simmer in the background until it's ready for me to get it out.
So where the series is going to start and stop, and it's just the creative process of getting the dialogue and narrative down. Is that pretty much what you're saying?
In a way, I know the big events throughout the whole series. I know what the main characters are going through as he's slowly figuring out all the little details until the end, when he figures out exactly who he is and where he came from and what that background is. And my problem is, what does he do in between, and what does the rest of the world, the other people around him do? It was like when I first wrote the first book, and I knew what's happening to the main character. So I went, sat down, and I wrote out the ambush, the crash, the fight of them surviving the crash, and then them being captured and being taken prisoner. But I knew there was something missing there, and I couldn't figure out what was missing. And then Marty looked at me, and he was like, well, what's the rest of the fleet doing? And I looked at him and said, I don't know. The main character doesn't know it, so I don't know. Well, it still needs to be in the story. It needs to still be shown. And that was my struggle in the first book, until like, oh, okay. And I needed to figure out, what are they doing in the background to explain why it takes 6 months for them to come back and all that stuff. And now with book 4, it's the same way. I know there's a couple of big events that are happening, but what are the characters doing to get to those big events? What are the details building up to it? And sometimes, like I said, it is a matter of, I know the main character is talking to this person over the comm. And
We're talking with Nicole Plume about writing problems. Thank you for joining us for this week's show. I'm Fred Hughes. This is The Next Chapter.